I'll call this meeting to order. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation and Public Works Committee, this day, July 16th. I'm the chair, Councilmember Reich. I'm joined by my colleagues on the dais, Councilmembers Johnson, Palmisano, Bender, and Fletcher. We are a quorum, and we'll proceed with today's agenda, of which we have 16 items. We have public hearings, a discussion item, and several consent items. I will go through the consent items first. Any committee member can pull them for further discussion. Starting with item number 4 on the consent agenda, request for proposals on the on-street parking mobile device payment system, authorizing our ability to submit that RFP. Item 5 is the request for proposal for operation of municipal solid waste transfer station. Item 6 is the contract amendment with Restoration Construction Services for the Fridley Softening Plant 2019 masonry project. Item 7 is the grant with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for electrical vehicle charging stations. Accepting that grant. Item 8 is the 10th Avenue Southeast River Bridge Rehabilitation Project. It's a grant acceptance from MnDOT, agreements and appropriation. Several items associated with that and dollar amounts listed. Item 9 is the cooperative construction agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for construction of stormwater storage facility. Item 10 is the agreement with the Minneapolis Park and Rec for sidewalk construction in North Commons Park. Item 11 is the bid for cleaning and lining of water mains. 12 is the bid for large diameter sanitary sewer assessment. 13 is the bid for cleaning of small diameter sanitary sewer system. 14 is the bid for the Ramp A expansion joint replacement project. Item 15 is the bid for the 11th Avenue and Marquette Ramp Phase 1 restoration. And I believe all of these items were low bid, except for item 11, which was second low bid. So with that, anyone want to pull for discussion? See none, all in, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't need to pull it for discussion, but I did want to comment on item number 4 and just thank staff for getting back to me. I'm very interested in the details of our on-street parking mobile device payment system, and I'll be working closely with staff on those details to make sure that we get to a place where we are both preserving data privacy practices that we've established in some other areas of our public works processes and keeping ourselves on the cutting edge of efficiently using the parking in our city. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you for your work in this particular area. Anyone wish to pull any other item for comment or discussion? See none, I will seek approval. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. Those items carry, and now we can go to the public hearing section. Good morning, Director Hutchinson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. We'll begin with our first public hearing, which is the passage of a resolution adopting and levying the assessments and adopting the assessment rule for sidewalk, snow, and ice removal charges for 2018 and 2019. Mike Kennedy, the Director of Transportation and Maintenance and Repair, will present information.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Kennedy.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, Mike Kennedy. I'm the Director of Transportation, Maintenance, and Repair for Minneapolis Public Works, and within our division is the Sidewalk Inspections Group that oversees the sidewalk shoveling ordinance in the winter. Each winter season, Public Works enforces the city sidewalk shoveling ordinance. For properties in violation of the ordinance, Public Works sends a notice, that we call a notice of violation, or an NOV, to the property owner. This year we sent 5,897 individual NOVs. And if the property remains in violation, then the Public Works hires a private contractor to remove the snow and ice on the sidewalk in front of the property. All property owners receive a bill for the completed work. This year we sent 1,424 invoices for work. If the owner does not pay the bill, the cost of the work will be listed on the assessment roll and assessed to the property taxes as a special assessment on January 1 of the next year. This will be 2020. If the property owner wishes to contest the cost of the work, they had the opportunity to appeal at an administrative hearing. This year we had 4 separate hearings, and we heard, the administrating hearing officer heard 115 appeals. If the property owner is satisfied with the determination of the administrating hearing officer, no further action is necessary. If the property owner wishes to contest the administrative hearing officer's determination, they may choose to appeal at the public hearing today before the Transportation and Public Works Committee of the City Council. We are aware of 11 people who had stated that they wish to either submit something in writing or appear today. If the appeal is denied by the committee or the council, then they may appeal to district court. Their appearance today or their written submission preserves their right to appear at district court. And a list of properties and the charges to be assessed are attached and dated the list of June 24, 2019. The properties on the list to be assessed, dated June 24, 2019, and is on file with the City Engineer's Special Assessment Office, had the snow and ice removal work done by the city during this past 2018-2019 winter season, were sent a bill for the cost of the removal work, and were notified that a special assessment for the removal charge plus interest would be added to their real estate taxes if the charges were not paid through the billing process. The amount to be assessed, the special assessment principal, is the cost of the removal work only. The amount to be assessed is the total principal amount of the proposed assessments on the list of the properties to be assessed is $165,494. The assessments would be collected in their entirety on the 2020 real estate taxes. Just to, as a refresher, to remind you, the process that we use to enforce the city's sidewalk ordinances last year was that on November 9, 2018, Director Hutchison sent a letter to some 130,000 property owners reminding them of their duty under the ordinance. Then as we get complaints through 311 or other sources, or this year we had our proactive sidewalk inspectors go out. Upon receiving that complaint or a positive report by the proactive team, we send an NOV to that property. Basically, about 3 working days later, an inspector will go out and inspect or re-inspect the property. If there is still noted a violation, we send a work order to our contractor, who has 72 hours to clear the sidewalk and get the work done. So today, our recommendation is passage of a resolution adopting and levying the assessments and adopting the assessment roll for sidewalk snow and ice removal charges for the 2018-19 winter season on the list of properties dated June 24, 2019. That's my presentation for today. We have a lot of staff here who can answer questions if we need, or I'll try to as well. And again, that's my presentation for today.
Thank you. Any questions per the staff presentation? See none, I will then proceed with today's public hearing. We do have people who signed in. I'll go through the people on the list in order. If you want to sign in subsequent to that, you certainly may. We'll begin with Mary Middlecamp. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Hi. My name is Mary Middlecamp. I live at 3303 Cedar Lake Avenue, Minneapolis. Do you want me to?
You have the floor.
All right. I am asking for some understanding here. I had my husband died back a few years ago, and he was the one that had hired somebody. We have a driveway that's a hill. And so we have to have it done by a snowplow. And then they do the sidewalks and as well. And so after he hired this man, and I just, knew that it was getting done, and that was all I knew. And then when he died, the man who, the company that did the snow removal, continued to do it for me. He'd check in the fall and make sure I wanted it. And yes, I did. So this went on for a number of years. And then this past year, I didn't hear from him, so I called him several times. And there was no answer, no return call, nothing. So then I had to really scramble to find, somebody to do snow removal. And a lot of people aren't eager to do it because the driveway is a hill and it has to be a truck with a snowplow. So I did finally find one. And what I did not realize, my property is actually like a point. And so, unbeknownst to me, I was responsible not only for a long stretch of highway out or street out front of my house, but around the corner. And I was the new man. I told him this is what you have to do, but I called the city and find out that my property wraps around the other side, and so sidewalk along there is what was not getting done because I didn't know that. And so I got this, and unfortunately, when I got the warning, I was out of town. And and then when I got back in, I saw the notification, and then I tried to come to a hearing that was set, but I didn't receive the notification until a day before, and I worked till 7, and so I got home at 7:30 and saw this, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and I had an appointment I could not break, so I couldn't show up at that hearing. So then they told me about this hearing. So anyway, I guess I'm just asking for understanding here in terms of now I know, and I've talked to the guy that did the snow plowing last year, and we're clear about how much he has to do. So that's my situation. I just didn't realize that I had this additional sidewalk that goes behind my, and I cannot see, I should make note of this, from my house sits up on a hill, but there's lots of foliage and bushes and so forth. I can't see that street that's behind me over here at all. And so I never witnessed him doing that part of the that sidewalk. The first man that whose services I lost when I couldn't get him anymore. So.
Yeah, thank you for that background, and I'll note that this time around we will have 3:15 is set aside with staff to work through these issues in detail, so thanks for sharing that. 3:15 is just out the door, and
Okay.
we'll have staff there to work through the details of any situation that's presented here today, if that's
3:15?
Yep.
So I should go there now, or?
after the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We will now go down the list, and we've got Mr. or Mrs. Hayden from 3736. Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I'm at the right place, but I don't know where is a place for people like myself. Handicapped people always find ourselves as the odd person out. And we need this listening and understanding and new legislation to help us. Otherwise, we will not survive the winter. I could have died from what happened to me. I could have lost much of my mental capacity for what happened to me. And because I'm a teacher, it's very important I have my mental capacity to try to recoup the enormous financial losses I've suffered. My concern is with commercial property, and nobody seems to want to talk about that. And I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, if you're going to allow me to talk about that.
No, you certainly have the floor.
Okay, thank you for understanding. I was on my way home from therapy, no big deal, got on the bus with no problems, got down to 35th, 38th Street in Chicago, and I got down the bottom of the hydraulic lift, and there was, eyeballing it, I would say about 10 inches of snow. Now, when I got on the bus, it was in front of a house, so they just did the sidewalk and the entrance walk. So there was no big pile of snow. But when I got down to in front of the convenience store, there was a big pile of snow, much too big for my walker wheels. If you look at my walker wheels, you'll see they're about 4 inches. So the enactment I want you to make is to make sure that snow is removed when it gets to the 4-inch rule. Otherwise, more people like myself, as I said, are going to be badly injured 16 days, and they wanted me to stay another week in the hospital or die from this. Now, let me briefly explain what happens. As I said, they scrape the whole lot, the whole area, dumpsters, gas pumps areas, entrances and parking area, the whole lot. So you have to get a mindset that you might have started out with 3 or 4 inches, but you're going to end up with 10 or more inches. And then they couldn't put the ramp out from the bus. And then they expect me to hop over the side of the bus ramp to get across the street to get my transfer. Unfortunately, my back wheel's caught. Walkers are built on 45-degree angles, just like the capital A you learned about in first grade. And down here is where the 45-degree angle and where the edge of that catches on the side of the ramp, because the side of the ramp is a 90-degree angle. So you can pull and pull and pull to get the back wheels released. And in the process of that, the law of momentum kicks in and you fall backwards, and that's how you have the stroke, damaging your vertebrae and your retina. So it's very simple. We just need to enact a 4-inch rule. The 4-hour rule will not work. I have in my bag the amount of snow we had in February. And if we broke it down to a couple of hours, there would be times when we had more snow than that during that any one period. So that's the deal. We need a 4-inch rule. Do you have any questions about my disability? Some people don't understand how handicapped equipment works together. And I've had big problems getting any justice to the legal system because I don't understand that. But I hope you'll understand that we get around in the winter, and I was coming home from therapy. This should be something that you all support. You all should support financially and otherwise people going to get therapy to do the best they can with their bodies. So we've got to keep the snow in reasonable amounts that we can handle with our wheels.
Thank you for that, and I think your comments are very illustrative of policies that we actually do have to support all mobility issues and ranking those that are most subject to burden highest. Of course, that's the policy. The realization of the policy is what you're suggesting we should be fine, and you've had a very specific suggestion that I believe that we will take seriously. We are in a pilot situation where we're trying to find what are our tools to make sure that people such as yourself and other citizens have access.
Yes,
The
and
proof is the
4 is the
access.
smallest inch size on wheels.
Very good. I appreciate that. Thank you. Now move down the list. Thank you. Greg Zajac, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Greg Zajac, 3452 Stinson Boulevard, Minneapolis. I was tagged by the city, or the sidewalk, about removal of snow. I had the snow removed. I paid somebody to remove it. It was removed. And then after the fact, 2 days later, the city came by and removed the entire amount of snow. For one thing I want to say is that the snow was not the fault of the gods. The snow was the fault of the city. The city comes by on Stinson Boulevard and pushes all the snow onto the sidewalk, and we're not talking just snow, we're talking ice. Ice that cannot be lifted by me. I've had people try to go through there with snow blowers that can't make it. I had to hire a professional company to try to get through this. And what I'm saying is that it's the fault of the city that the snow is where it is. And the way it is. It's too heavy, it's ice, it can't be moved, and if the city would like to buy me a Bobcat, I'd be more than happy to remove that snow. And I have photos to prove it, as well as an invoice. So anything that, any other information you'd like in these photos, and, feel free.
Very good. Well, thank you, and I suggest going in and sharing that with staff directly to see if your case is amenable to an adjustment. And I'll just say for my colleagues, I'm hoping that we can take the time between now, the committee meeting, and the formal vote, which is at City Council, for any adjustments that warrant an adjustment.
Well, I'm not looking for an adjustment. I'm looking for a solution.
Very good.
And as far as I'm concerned, unless the city comes up with some solution, there's no way that this is ever going to be resolved. And they're going to be still dumping tons of ice onto the sidewalk and expect it to be shoveled the next day.
Yeah, we'll have staff make comment at the end of the hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving down the list, John Kakor, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Yes, John Klinkner, and it's 4127 Linden Hills Boulevard. And I'm here today to ask for the $299 assessment removed. I've maintained property for over 50 years. When I was a teen, I shoveled snow in the neighborhood for 20, 30 people, so I'm not afraid of shoveling snow. This property is a block from the lake. Snow blows off the lake sometimes. The main issue here is 12/19, I received a warning letter about some snow on the walk. It was shoveled. It was postmarked December 14th. The letter was sent to the wrong address. The address that I have with the city is recorded. The city Hennepin County has my address for the property taxes. And so when I got the letter on the 19th of December, I went over there right away. The city had already been there and already charged me $299. I didn't even have time to respond to this letter. On December 24th, I received a bill for $299. And like I said, this was before I even had a chance to respond to this. Now, to make it even worse, I have the postmark and the letters that I received December 14th, and I received it on the 19th. They went out there on the 13th and removed the snow, or whatever they did, 18th, and they scraped it or something. And then I got billed on the 19th, which I received on the 25th. And I also have the postmark here, December 20th, when I received the bill. Now, I went and I appealed it originally, and I have my appeal letter. It has my address, and guess what? They sent out the hearing to the wrong address. So when I got it, the hearing was already over. So that's why I'm here today, to be heard. This also happened on another property about a block away from there on Lake Harriet Parkway. It's an apartment building. And this was sent, the warning letter was sent to a house that I lived in over 12 years ago. And when I got it, or when they got it, they called me up and said, hey, here's a letter from this property. You didn't know anything about it. And this property, like I say, I don't know why they would have sent it to the wrong address, but it's what they did. And like a house that I lived there 12 years ago. Luckily, there was no charges on that. That property now is run by a management company that manages a lot of property in Minneapolis, and I have them do most of my buildings now. And I have a statement here showing the management company. If you want to see it, it's the management company that, and I have my, so they have a professional staff that runs the sidewalk removal, and they do a very good job. But they got a warning letter too. Luckily, nothing was done. So I'm just asking to have this abated because it was sent to the wrong address and did not give me time to even respond to this. And I'm in Minneapolis every day, and I hate to complain, but I know the city probably needs more help in their snow removal. The gentleman before me, I have the same problem. The trucks come by, and I worked in construction most of my life, and the trucks go too fast, and they push all the snow up on the sidewalks, where we have to come and try and scrape all this ice and stuff. In February, we had a lot of snow, and off of Lake Calhoun and West Calhoun and Lake Street, there were bus stops. This is a week after the snowfall. And I got pictures here where the snow was 2 feet deep by bus stops, by the fire station, everything right there. You know, I have nothing against the fire department. I know guys who work on the fire department, they do a great job. But right outside the fire station, 2 weeks after the snow, there's still snow and stuff on the sidewalk. So it's a little hypocritical. Maybe they have to treat property owners a little more fairly and understanding, you know, and I'm totally getting the snow removed, and that's what I do. I'm the first one to have the shovel snow in the neighborhood. But in this situation, I think it was excessive charge, and like I say, I was charged before I even got the warning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Clearly, we obviously, if there's a discrepancy in our procedures, you know, due to human error or record keeping, we can be sensitive to that as well. And we'll address the other issues in terms of our plowing techniques at the end of the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. William Ng, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is William Ng, and then I come from the South Minneapolis.
You might want to approach the... Thank you.
Yeah. My name is William Ng. I come from Minneapolis, 420928. Today I come down here because I showered the snow, and they do send me the bill, the snow. Because that day I hired someone to do it. The boy do it, but he didn't do it on Sunday. So next day, today, I come down on March 12th. I do by myself, and the shower, everything. I'll clean up both sides on the corner house, you know. And then, yeah, they still send me the bill. I wonder why. I sell the snow already, and they still put me in the notes. They have to pay for the bill, you know. So I wonder what happened, you know.
Yeah, again, I would suggest...
Because probably they didn't know about the snow we done already, you know, on March 12th, you know, so...
Well, I would suggest to share your record of events and then the staff file on it and to see if there's a discrepancy. Again, 315, we'll have staff in there to look at those details. And if there is a discrepancy, we can work through these issues between now and the council meeting, which is within...
I hope they don't reduce or drop off the bill there.
Understood.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good day. Moving down the list here, Amanda Deloye. Again, I probably pronounced it wrong. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Amanda Deloye, and I'm here about the 2900 Portland Avenue. We wish to appeal the assessment for clearing the sidewalk. The before photos presented by the city at the hearing we went to in May showed a negligible amount of snow on the sidewalk compared to snow on sidewalks down the block. And then the after photos show a difference in snow the same as other properties, and it honestly is not clear that work was even done there. In the hearing, the city staff person verbally told the judge that the property had received, quote, many prior complaints about snow removal, but did not present any specific details about these complaints. The property is a vacant lot requiring snow removal within just 24 hours of the end of the snowfall. It's possible, likely, that the property did receive complaints as it's on a major pedestrian street. Portland Avenue is relatively challenging as far as the snow plows and just a large amount of pedestrians that pack down the snow. But anyway, I don't believe that, and have not been given any evidence that any of these complaints were about snow removal beyond that 24 hours. We have a small team managing a number of rental properties on Portland Avenue. We live there ourselves, so we're not absentee landlords. We take snow removal very seriously, and this past year, in the past, we had a contractor, but this past year we decided to do the snow removal ourselves. We had a riding tractor and 3-4 snow blowers, 3, 4, 5 people. And as you can imagine, we would focus on our rental properties first in an effort to get those done, both for the tenants and for for the safety of the pedestrians. So for sure the vacant lot at the end sometimes would take us 5-6 hours to remove the snow, and of course probably some pedestrians had a hard time, and we definitely feel bad about that. And we were out there working as hard as we possibly could for hours and hours this past winter to take care of that. But I truly don't believe that any time that lot was left unclear more than the 24 hours. So because of that, we would like to contest this assessment. Just based on the findings of fact that the judge wrote up, it seems like her decision was not so much based on these photos, which you can see here don't really show anything, but it seems to be based on just that staff person's sort of verbal charge of like, oh, this property has trouble. So, just based on that lack of evidence, it seems like this is not quite a fair assessment.
Fair enough, and after the hearing, we'll have staff address the standard of evidence for our determinations.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Moving down the list, Nazneen Khatoon, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you so much. I'm Nazneen Khatoon. The property address is 19 Sydney Place in Minneapolis. This is a rental property. I do not live in this property. We do have a contractor who does the snow cleaning and shoveling. The first letter I received from the city was on 4/30 stating that on 3/25 the city has to remove the snow, and there was a charge of $149. This was the first letter that I received from the city. So I appealed the decision, and so when I appealed it, it appears that on May 24th, they sent me a hearing letter, and you could see that it was sent to the wrong address. I moved to Minneapolis 5 years ago, and the rental license is under the right address in Minneapolis. So I'm just assuming that probably the letter with the pictures and telling me that I need to clean it might have gone to the wrong address, which I was never in receipt of that. And according to the ordinance, I'm supposed to get a letter and a 24-hour notice to clean it. So at this moment, I don't know if my contractor cleaned it or did the city clean the street and they dumped it. So I really can't say that. So I feel that I did not notify of cleaning the sidewalk, so I should not be assessed that $149, and I have the proof of where it was mailed to. So then I called them and I said, because I was scheduled on May 22nd for this hearing, so I said I never received it, and I got this in June, so then they rescheduled me today.
Well, thank you for that, and we'll have staff address the discrepancies in notification. That's the second testifier that brought that up. So
thank you so much.
Anyone else sign in subsequently? Anyone else wish to come forward? Anyone else wish to come forward? Seeing no one coming forward and going through the list, I will close the public hearing, and we can have staff maybe address some of the issues that were raised, but noting that some of the more detailed work, we will have staff in 3:15 for subsequent more detailed discussion with the people who come here today. But some of the broader items that were brought forward, including letter notifications, level of evidence for our determinations, and then just sort of the relationship between our snow removal and the citizen snow removal, that also came up. It's not the first time. So we should come forward and just broadly respond.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, is pretty vague. The easiest one is there is a concern, we did hear this at some of the other hearings, that snowplows push snow back onto the sidewalks. And that can happen. Once in a while it'll happen. It happens most often when the sidewalks are adjacent to the curb. It happens fairly consistently there. We do have our forces sometimes have a problem with that. The county forces sometimes will have a problem with that. In both cases, if we plow the snow back onto that sidewalk, in the first place, snow storage from the street and the sidewalk has to be shared over the curb. And so there will be the windrow of snow that gets plowed up has to be stored on the curb there. As long as the sidewalk is open, 3-4 feet for about a wheelchair access, the sidewalk inspectors won't gig it. And so there is that. But if the plows do really bury a sidewalk, if people call 311 and report it, either the county or the city forces will come out and take a look. And if we feel we've done something extraordinary, we will come and clean it up. So that may not be that well known out there, but that is there for the public. And we understand that we have those kinds of situations. And when we get really big snowfalls, that's going to happen sometimes. Boulders can roll off and things like that. It's not because the plowers are careless. It's just because it's physics. It's a snow storage issue. We do know that there are issues related to addressing and where we send our notice of violations, and lots of problems with the 311 app, the see-click fix type of app. There's the addresses that are coming in through that are in our ELMS, or Enterprise Land Management System, where we manage all of these notifications and the whole process. Addresses with the Hennepin County and our city assessor's office don't always align, and so we do have some problems with that. Regarding the NOVs, typically the NOV is kind of a courtesy. There's no requirement that we send that, but we do try to send that to allow people. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. We try to give some those 3 days to let it get through the mail, but it doesn't always make it there in time. One thing to remember is if people saying they get their notice late, well, and they go, oh, geez, I haven't shoveled my sidewalk, they are in violation. They're already past that 24 hours and they haven't shoveled their sidewalk. So we've heard some of those kinds of concerns, and those are issues that we are looking to address in the next, hopefully before the next season, but it's coming up fast, and so we'll see what we do. A lot of these issues have been magnified by the number of NOVs and work orders that we have and the bills that we have sent. It's a larger number with our proactive program and things like that, and being more aggressive, shortening the time frame. These issues are kind of being magnified, and so we'll need to take steps to try to address that as much as we can.
Yeah, I think it's not a coincidence that we have a more aggressive policy, and we had an extraordinary winter to bring the numbers up. I don't know if Director Hutchinson, you want to make any comments, broadly speaking?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. We've made a number of changes over the last 2 years to increase the mobility for all people who need to use our sidewalks through the winter. I appreciated the testimony from a member of our disabled community today with some extraordinary challenges. That's exactly the kind of mobility that we need to do better in providing. It means that we have taken steps to increase our enforcement, and the way that we're going about that is to be able to visually verify when we do have compliance issues, and that also helps with the addressing, correcting any of the addressing issues that we do have. It was an extraordinary winter. I myself received complaints about snow being redeposited on the sidewalks. We did our very best to address the situation and showed leniency, as Director Kennedy has explained, showed leniency that when the sidewalk was passable, we did not issue a notice of violation. This is, as the director said, a process of improvement. It takes more than 1 year and 2 years to get there. There was a higher number of cases, a higher number of appeals, a higher number of dismissals, and a higher number of members of our community that came today to testify That none of that is unexpected and all part of our, as I said, our process of improvement over multiple years to improve conditions for all people who need to use our sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any comments from colleagues per the hearing? Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a moment to thank the department for all of your work on this issue, kind of echoing what the director just stated. I think given the severity of weather this winter, as well as our efforts to make sure that our sidewalks are cleared, this is a relatively small number of cases that our staff will be able to follow up on and handle individually, as the chair has mentioned in the room after the hearing is over. But I just did want to emphasize how important this issue is and why, representing a ward that is heavily transit dependent and transit oriented, where folks are walking and taking transit all winter. I hear frequently from my constituents, particularly those who are in wheelchair or otherwise, experiencing disability and relying on or even, frankly, even folks who are able-bodied who are trying to use our bus system in the winter are really having to sort of climb over mountains of snow at bus stops and struggling to pass through our sidewalks. So that's why we have become more proactive in making sure that our sidewalks are cleared. There's a balance to be struck and compassion for folks who have particular situations. So I think, we're all watching this very closely because we hear about it so frequently from our constituents, and it has been such a high priority for our pedestrian advisory committee as well to really make sure that our sidewalks are passable for everyone all winter long, particularly for those folks who are depending on transit to get to the places that they need to go. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Any other?
Sure, if I might add one more thing.
Certainly.
3 of the people who testified today have already had their assessments reduced by the hearing officer. So when we talk with them, that's where we're at. Just so you know that some of this has already been done.
Yep. Yeah. Understood, and thank you for that context. Any other comments per the hearing? Councilmember Palmisano.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question. At the beginning of this hearing, it was mentioned that 1,424 properties were invoiced this past year, and you have mentioned it being a big upswing from years prior. And while I don't anticipate the exact number of years prior, can you give me a sense of how much of an increase this is? Again, with the complicating factors being an unprecedented amount of snow and other issues, including extreme cold.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, I have those numbers. As I mentioned, for this previous season, 2018-19, there were 5,897 NOVs sent and 1,424 invoices sent. In the previous winter, we had 4,645 NOVs sent, 992 invoices, so that's a drop of about 500. And the winter 2016-17, we had 1,938 NOVs sent and 161 actually cleared by the contractor. Now, that winter, two winters ago, we hadn't shortened the process yet. And in the beginning of that season, there were some problems, some connection problems between 311 and our ELMS system that kind of kept that number down. We had to solve some issues going in. I think that might have been one of the first years of ELMS. So that's a little bit of why those numbers are down. But this has been ramping up. And probably the big change is the proactive numbers. It's about 25-30% of these are a result of proactive teams versus the complaint process for this past year.
Thank you. That helps give us a lot of context.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. I do encourage folks to go to 315 to work through any remaining issues. Clearly we are motivated to provide access for all our people in the city, but we also know that things in the field aren't always to the perfection of a plan, and so that takes work and partnership between our citizens and staff. I think staff has presented themselves in a manner of trying to work and collaborate. Even when there's more extreme situations, like you say, the shared right-of-way issues with the plowing, it seems that we were able to respond if called upon. We might not lend out one of our Bobcats, but one of our staff might go out there and help. And so I think that element of collaboration between the city and the citizenry is what's going to make this move forward and work for all. So with that, I'm going to move the items forward, knowing that adjustments can be made between now and the city council meeting. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thank you. Now have public hearing number 2. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this next item is an passage of a resolution adopting our annual report for our 2018 activities associated with our integrated permit to regulate combined storm and wastewater discharges. That integrated permit is the result, just a quick reminder, of the hard work of the surface water and sewer team who demonstrated the city's commitment to environmental quality, and were able to change the type of permit that we have, allowing the city more proactive flexibility in how we handle the issues. Liz Stout is with Surface Water and Sewers. She has taken the lead in preparing this annual report and will be presenting information in support of this public hearing.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning.
Chair Wright, council members, thank you for having me here today. As Director Hutchinson mentioned, the city and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board are co-permittees on this stormwater management permit. One of the requirements is an opportunity for public input on our programs each year before we submit our annual report to the Pollution Control Agency, and that's the purpose of today's public hearing. First, I want to start with a little bit of history. The national focus on cleaning up our waterways really began with the passage of the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972. At that time, the primary focus was on industrial pollutants, industrial polluters. Those are going to be your factories and wastewater treatment plants. One of the most significant events that led to the passage of the Clean Water Act was the Cuyahoga River in Ohio catching fire. This year is actually the 50th anniversary of this event. The picture above was taken during a 1969 fire, and the picture at the bottom is from the early 1970s and shows where the Cuyahoga River enters Lake Erie. Here in the Twin Cities, a 1926 fish survey found only 2 living fish in the Mississippi River between St. Anthony Falls and Red Wing. Today, there's an estimated 127 different species of fish living in that same stretch of water. So that really shows the progress that we've been able to make in the last 100 years as far as clean water and improving our ecosystems. While it started with regulating industrial discharges and wastewater treatment, as time passed, the Clean Water Act evolved and cities and large construction projects fell under its purview. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, Minneapolis, like other cities, needs to manage stormwater to keep pollutants from degrading its water bodies. This management is done under the municipal stormwater permit. It's also known as an MS4 permit or a Clean Water Act permit. I'll use both of those kind of interchangeably today. All of this regulation is ultimately driven by 2 main goals. We want water resources that are fishable and swimmable. The biggest pollutants that we deal with urban stormwater are suspended sediments, and then all of the pollutants that attach themselves to those sediment particles. Those include phosphorus, heavy metals, PAHs, bacteria, and salt chlorides. We're using a more integrated approach with all of our permitting and our water resource protection in general. The city was issued a new Clean Water Act permit in 2018 by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that directs our work to monitor, report, and invest in the storm sewer system. This new permit really acknowledges the integrated approach that Public Works in the city has taken, and it requires a more integrated infrastructure management approach. One of the requirements that comes from this permit issuance is that we develop a new stormwater management program. We call it a SWAMP. The SWAMP outlines the specific things that the city is either doing on an ongoing basis and any new programs or initiatives that we're going to undertake under the next 5-year permit cycle. The SWAMP describes work plans, timelines, and participating departments across the city with responsibility towards stormwater protection and management. For example, it describes our public education program and target audiences. It describes how the city manages spill response and how we maintain our stormwater ponds, wetlands, and rain gardens. There are some significant changes to the swamp based on this new permit. The most significant I'm going to be discussing here with you today. As you've probably seen this graphic before in other discussions of this sanitary and storm sewer system, the system was originally built as a combined sewer system. Both stormwater and sanitary flows all went directly to the Mississippi River. In 1922, construction started on the first separate storm sewers that were around the lakes and then in newly developing areas. In the 1930s, with the construction of the wastewater treatment plant at Pig's Eye, all sanitary sewer and stormwater flows began being treated, unless the capacity of the collection system was overwhelmed, in which case all of that combined, again, sanitary and storm sewer, went right back into the river untreated. In the 1960s, storm sewer separation started on a much larger scale citywide. In 1986, the city began an accelerated separation program funded by state and federal funds. And we continue to make progress with doing separation, as well as maintaining and rehabilitating both of our stormwater and sanitary sewer systems. The remaining work that we have is challenging. We've really addressed all of the low-hanging fruit, and the remaining sites are challenging for different reasons. There may be downstream pipe constraints or water resources challenges. And as we saw from the storm that happened last night, we still get these large rain events that are being exacerbated by climate change. And so that puts additional pressure onto our stormwater system where we may not want to add additional flows and create new flooding. As you can see from this graphic, we've been incredibly successful in eliminating discharges to the river. As we continue to look for and address remaining sewer connections, we're fortunate to have this new regulatory permit that recognizes our commitment to this integrated approach that allows us to address aging infrastructure, flooding, and water quality needs throughout the city. The integrated permit not only directs our work to monitor, report, and invest in the storm system to improve water quality, it also recognizes the historic success that the city has had in disconnecting the sanitary and the storm sewer systems. The details of the integrated approach is the most significant change to our permit and to our stormwater management program. The second significant change to the swamp involves the city and the park board's public education and outreach programs. It isn't enough to just print brochures and invite people to public meetings like this to engage them on stormwater and water quality. The new swamp makes it a priority for the city to develop multilingual programs for residents and businesses. It requires a focus on key issues such as proper pesticide, herbicide, and fertilizer use. It prioritizes educating the public and commercial applicators on the proper management and application of de-icing materials so that we can reduce salt usage throughout the city. And it isn't enough to just develop these programs. The new swamp requires the city to implement an education work plan to help us better set goals, identify our specific target audiences, and actually measure how far we're going towards meeting our goals. For example, our yellow duck ambassadors were focused on persuading park patrons not to feed the ducks at local lakes. An oversized buoy in the shape of a rubber duck floated at Lake Harriet and a budding bread and pickle, and there were about 200 tabletop displays of rubber duckies telling people not to feed the ducks. The park board staff actually did surveys of park users and physically watched the behavior of people. And there was a noticeable decline in people feeding the ducks. And park users specifically mentioned this education campaign as one of the reasons why for behavior change. The 2018 Minneapolis Earth Day cleanup event was held at 34 sites throughout the city. It's a collaborative effort between the Park Board and the City of Minneapolis Solid Waste and Recycling Division. The original Earth Day was snowed out in April, but our May event had over 500 volunteers that collected about 4,700 pounds of trash, recycling, and metal. In addition to just the cleanup events, we had some hands-on learning about water quality, recycling, composting, and organic gardening and lawn care. Utilizing active engagement activities like storm drain stenciling and adopt a drain programs is another way to increase community engagement around water quality. And help promote the message that it isn't the city's water, it's the community's water. In 2018, we had 239 new storm drain adopters in the program, cleaning over 600 storm drains. And there were 30 storm drain stenciling events that engaged over 230 community volunteers. The third major change to the city's stormwater management program is around the type of water quality monitoring we do in cooperation with the Park Board. The city and the Park Board currently do 3 types of water quality monitoring. The first is we monitor all of the lakes. We do it every other week during the growing season, which is really April through October. That looks at the chemistry, composition, the transparency of that lake monitoring. That won't change as part of this new program. The second type is what's called land use monitoring, where we look at the stormwater runoff from 4 different sites representing major land uses in Minneapolis. That would be single-family residential, industrial, mixed use, and parkland. And that water is collected during storm events and analyzed. We have data from 2001 to 2019, and the biggest change is we're going to be discontinuing this type of monitoring going in the future. We have a really robust amount of data that will help us calibrate models and use for other things, but there's been no change in these land uses. So if we were to do a pilot, like a street sweeping pilot, we may continue this monitoring. However, we feel like we've gathered nearly 20 years worth of data and there's nothing new that we can collect here. Instead, we're going to be focusing more on the third type of monitoring, which is actually looking at stormwater management facilities or best management practices. We call them BMPs. What we do is we actually collect water at the inlets and outlets of these stormwater management facilities, and it helps us determine how effective they are. The pictures you see here that on the top is actually the inlet to Weber Pond, and at the bottom is at the outlet. So you can see a little bit of a difference. A couple of the stormwater management facilities that we're monitoring, again, I mentioned Weber Pond. We also have the winter infiltration basin. We have some pre-treatment as well as 2 inlets to this facility. So we're actually monitoring both upstream and downstream of the hydrodynamic separator, which is a pre-treatment device. We're also monitoring at the other inlet and at the outlet to look at the different components and how effective those are at removing pollutants. We've determined that the winter basin actually infiltrates 100% of the storms under 0.7 of an inch within 2.5 hours. And it's 90% effective at infiltration over an annual basis. Another thing that the monitoring program can tell us is how to be more effective and efficient at our maintenance activities. The monitoring has shown us that there's been some trash that builds up at those, some of the trash grates at the inlets, and that should be removed. And the hydrodynamic separator, the pre-treatment at the inlet, could be cleaned more frequently in order to get rid of some of that sediment before it gets into the infiltration basin. This is an underground cistern at the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden. The Park Board has been monitoring that to look at, this is stormwater reuse. This water is being collected in the cistern and then being reused as part of the irrigation system for the Sculpture Garden. Samples are being collected to really look at, is this water meeting standard? As we irrigate the land, are we creating a secondary issue? So we want to make sure that as we reuse this water and reuse systems like this in the future, that we're designing them correctly and we're utilizing that water appropriately. In the future, let me go back. In the future, as we look at new BMPs or new technologies, we want to continue this type of monitoring. It helps us be more effective at designing BMPs. It helps us be more effective at understanding how to monitor them. And then we can use that data in the future to design better and to be more cost effective and truly understand the impacts that these facilities are having on our water bodies. These three are the most significant changes that are being made both within the permit and to the city swamp. And we'll be sending the swamp today to the Pollution Control Agency for their review and approval. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm open to any questions.
Any questions per the staff presentation? Seeing none, thank you for the presentation. It's a highly technical action that we have before us. And I think you've boiled it down in a way that seems meaningful in terms of why we're doing it. And I think the presentation also, is also a very good display for how it relates to the average resident of Minneapolis and our activities. I think the chair will also note or sort of reiterate the significance of the work that had been done so we can actually manage in this new, more effective way. That was a monumental amount of work that the department conducted successfully, I think in a very unprecedented way, and we're reaping the benefits to, well, do more work, but we feel better work for better results. So thanks for taking the time for the presentation, and we have the request before us for item number 2, further discussion. What's that? We lost quorum. Oh, 1, 2, 3, we have lost quorum. We cannot take official action. Is this where we have soothing music kind of kick in for our cable TV audience? Oh, we now have quorum. We're just about to approve item number 2 in the public hearing, the Minneapolis Stormwater Management Program and Annual Report. The 2 action items are listed. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in. Yes?
Did you open the public?
Oh, I don't think I did. So we will open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to come forward? Seeing none, all in favor of the item before us, say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. Okay, we got through that. Okay, public hearing number 3.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, public hearing number 3 is a land sale for a vacated portion of right-of-way adjacent to 620 Olson Memorial Highway. This is what I would call a remnant property as large highways are constructed, Olson Memorial being one of them. We often have small pieces of property that are left over from that process. This is one such property. Additional information will be provided by Matt Hanyon, who's presenting now.
Good morning.
Good morning. Chair Wright, members of the committee, my name is Matt Hannon with the Transportation Engineering and Design Division of Public Works. This is a public hearing and request for City Council to authorize the conveyance of city-owned land to the adjacent property owner. The property is an approximately 4,200 square foot piece of land along the western border of 620 Olson Memorial Highway. The adjacent property owner, North Loop Campus LLC, has submitted an offer to purchase the property for the appraised value of $1,000. Factors impacting the value of the property include the existence of multiple easements over the entire parcel, its limited marketability, and that assemblage with the 620 Olson Memorial Highway parcel and continued use as a paved road is the only possible use and therefore the highest and best use. The city engineer has declared the property as excess and not needed for municipal operations. The city's right-of-way interest was vacated in 2017. As a condition of the land sale, the city will retain an easement for drainage and utilities over the entire parcel and an easement for bridge maintenance over a portion of the property. The action before you is to pass the resolution approving the sale of the property to North Loop Campus LLC for $1,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions per the staff presentation? See none, I will open the public hearing. We have one person signed in, Carol Lansing. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, Chair Reich and council members. I'm representing the owner on this land sale. Just wanted to thank Matt and staff for working on this and hear if you have any questions.
I don't think we have any, so thank you. Anyone else wish to come forward? Anyone else wish to come forward? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move item 3, land sale and vacation as described in the staff report. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. We've concluded our public hearings and we'll have our final item, which is a discussion item. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the Transportation and Public Works Committee, it is with great pleasure that I will say a few words about this next item, which is a presentation discussion item on our bus pilot corridors evaluation and selection. Last year, we did our very first bus-only pilot. It was a success. It caused us to think that we should try this in other settings and areas of the city in order to compare and contrast different installations. We then got a boost from the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge, which offered us resources from the NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials staff that would help us accelerate the work. Today, we will present information on the program, a little bit about results of the first one, information on the program, and how we plan to roll the first 3 of 5 out. I want to note 2 things regarding collaboration. First of all, this is a huge collaboration between Metro Transit and the city. Metro Transit approached us, said we have problems with efficiency and reliability on certain corridors in the city. Let's partner and try and make this better. We continue that collaboration. And 2, this has been an example of collaboration within Public Works between 2 different divisions who have worked really hard on this, between transportation planning and traffic. Both staff members are here. Becca, who will be presenting, Becca, who through her diligent work has been promoted to senior transportation planner, and Alan Klugman, who is a partner with Becca. The 2 of them have been invited to speak nationally in multiple settings about their work here, and I want to recognize that that very close collaboration among different divisions. We are one Public Works. This is a perfect example of that. With that, I would like to introduce Becca Hughes, who will provide additional information on the bus pilot corridors.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Reich and committee members. Becca Hughes, Senior Transportation Planner with Transportation Planning and Programming. That was a great introduction. I had something similar that I was planning to say. I think just mentioning that without supportive management, we certainly wouldn't have been able to do the work here that I'm about to present. So acknowledging Director Hutchinson, my director, Jenny Hagar, and my manager, Kathleen Mayle, and Alan Klugman, of course, who's integral to it seems like almost everything that I do. And so we talk late nights. We constantly, I think if a day doesn't go by that we don't have a conversation, it's almost shocking. And he enjoys when I schedule lunch meetings, also just as an aside. So moving into the presentation, and of course Metro Transit, between Michael Mettenberg, all of the data guys, and in fact we have someone from Metro Transit here today, Joey Reed, Antoinette, Katie Roth, all of those people at Metro Transit have just been really integral to being able to develop what I'm about to share here this morning. So moving into the presentation, so I'm here today to talk a little bit about the bus pilot corridors as well as the evaluation and selection process that is underway. So just a little bit of timeline and background, just to give a little context to the conversation, is that in May of 2018, as you're probably all aware, we deployed our first bus-only pilot lane on Hennepin Avenue in South Minneapolis. I'll get into those details in a bit. But around the same time, starting in July of 2018 through March of 2019, we really began the Transportation Action Plan work. And as you probably know, this is really the first time we're putting a city lens and vision to transit. And we needed the partnership of Metro Transit to do that. And so what we've really done is taken a data-driven approach. The partnership with Metro Transit, they provided us with a tremendous amount of information. It's really amazing how much information is captured through the vehicles that Metro Transit uses through their AVL system. And they shared all of that with us. And so we had humongous spreadsheets that we kind of had to work through to be able to pull through and gather some of the more important metrics that would help guide decision-making. From there, we basically developed an evaluation framework. And again, the intent was to look citywide and to identify transit corridors citywide. And really this was taking some of those select Metro Transit performance metrics and combining them with our own city metrics. So looking at some of the Minneapolis 2040 corridor elements, general locations across the city in terms of distribution, et cetera, and I'll get into that in a bit. But really the purpose of this in terms of, looking at an evaluation framework not only was to develop sort of this network citywide in which we look at implementing transit advantages and bus-only lanes, but also to utilize that and work moving forward with the Transportation Action Plan to inform future designs as well as to modify some of those existing routes that Metro Transit currently operates in the city. So moving into October of 2018, as Director Hutchinson mentioned, the city joined the ACCC, or the American Cities Climate Challenge Initiative, to address the transportation contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And so really the intent with that was to kind of work through these bus pilots, to implement 3 to 4 pilots projects in the next 2 years, 2019 and 2020, and to complement those efforts that I previously described regarding the evaluation metrics. So going back and talking about what happened in May of 2018, what we wanted to do is just kind of share some of those basic results and some of the details of that pilot just as a quick recollection. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The question that people asked us a lot was, why are you selecting Hennepin as the first corridor to implement or to try these bus-only lanes in the city? And so when you look at this, I think this is a pretty telling exhibit. This is something that we shared initially when we were going out into the community over a year or so ago, but looking at really the bus mode share, so the percentage of vehicles that are represented by transit vehicles and accordingly how many corridor users are riding those. So 3% of the corridor vehicles or the bus mode share carrying 49% of the users, and that's basically just an AM cut showing during the peak hour, and then in the PM peak 2% carrying 45% of the corridor users. So that's why we started with Hennepin and decided to test that over the course of 3 days. So as I mentioned, it was a 3-day test. It was in May of 2018. At that time, what we did is we looked at sort of having a northbound bus lane that began at 26th and operated during the peak hours, and we intentionally made those hours wide so that we would know in the future if we needed to narrow them. So we kind of went big. We started the bus pilot operation at 6:30 in the morning, and we had it basically for a 3-hour stretch to 9:30. And then similarly from southbound, during the PM peak, we had a wide range in terms of time. It went from 3:30 to 7 o'clock p.m. So that's what we tested during the 3 days. I think it's important to note that this was a big effort between Metro Transit and ourselves over the course of months to basically figure out how we could design this pilot. And what we did is that we used the existing cross-section, we used the existing line markings around on the roads. That effectively meant that the bus had to operate in a 10-foot curbside lane, both northbound and southbound. Additionally, we used cones to sort of demarcate that, and then we had staff that was out on site doing monitoring and operations throughout that entire 3-day period. So just going into some very quick bus travel time data. Essentially what this is showing is that in northbound and southbound, you can see if you look at meet scheduled runtime, which is the second column down, about 20% of the trips in the northbound meet their scheduled runtimes through Metro Transit. That's not very good. And about 30% meet their scheduled runtimes southbound in the PM peak. So that's just taking a quick look at the snapshot. And basically when we during this whole process, of course, Metro Transit, we had city officials that were out collecting data during this period of time so that we could report back and basically determine that the bus-only lanes were effective in improving the reliability of transit on this corridor during the pilot. And what you can see here is that there were improvements both north and southbound during the test. In terms of feedback, and this was something that Metro Transit really worked to gather, they had public feedback, over 120 comments. I think probably the most telling statistic here is that 75% responded that the bus lanes improve their experience, and perception is a lot when it comes to transit, whether it's reliability and any other factor that relates to that. So we were pretty excited about that statistic. They also did an operator survey. They were curious what their operators would think about operating in a curbside lane. They felt the lanes were too narrow, which we knew going into this is that 10 feet was going to be pretty tight, but there were also 92%, nearly all of the operators felt there was an advantage to having dedicated bus lanes on Hennepin Avenue. And so moving forward, what do we, just sort of the things that we would, or the sort of elements that we would advance moving forward on a project like this, is that we would shorten the peak hours in both northbound and southbound. And it was evident that, the 3-hour segments that we basically had for both AM and PM peak were too long, that we needed to widen the curbside lanes, and to look at changing the extent. What we actually saw when we looked at the data was that 25th was actually the breaking point, not 26th. As well as to clear obstructions, so tree limbs, relocating bike lanes so they're not as close to the curb line but are located more properly in that furnishing zone, as well as even road service. As you know, this road is up for reconstruction in 2023. It's in pretty rough shape, and so the bus having such a constrained space, running on the curb line, the ride wasn't particularly smooth during that bus pilot. So 2019 projects. So really the purpose of us doing pilot tests and looking at these corridors again was to look at a citywide approach, looking at testing in different contexts and different corridors. There's a lot of potential strategies, of course, that we could implement when we look at bus-only lanes. On Hennepin, obviously it was parking removal, curbside during AM and PM peak. That's just one strategy. And as we begin to plan and design the additional 2019 and 2020 projects, we'll be looking at different strategies in terms of implementation. As I mentioned earlier, a part of the purpose of doing these pilot tests, of course, is to inform what we advance forward as part of the transit section and the Transportation Action Plan. So that's an important piece. Again, future designs, increasing transit mode share in the city is key. As you know, we've had declining ridership overall in the city. We sit around 6 to 7% in terms of transit mode share, and we need to figure out ways to make transit more attractive to potential users throughout the city. And additionally, to bring partner agencies along. So in 2020, really one of our main objectives, in addition to greater geographic distribution of projects, is that we'll be looking to work more closely with our partners at MnDOT and Hennepin County. So this is an example of a bus lane. I'm sure that if you've traveled at all, really, you'll see in some of the bigger metropolitan cities, you'll see that there are already bus-only lanes deployed in many other cities. This is an example from Chicago. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see that this is a two-way street that currently has curbside bus-only lanes. If you look at the right-hand photo, basically what that's depicting is a one-way street in Chicago, again with a curbside bus lane. You'll notice there's red paint, there's decals, and there's also the appropriate signage that is implemented along with bus-only lanes. So in terms of selection criteria, so this is really where we used Metro Transit's data, the voluminous amounts of data, had many meetings talking about how to establish a framework that would not only benefit Metro Transit operations in the city, but provide better transit service in the city. And so what we did is, this is sort of a sampling of some of the elements that we looked at. I do have a very enormous spreadsheet. I think you know that we like spreadsheets in TPP and probably in Public Works, but we have a really large spreadsheet. This is basically just a sampling of some of the items that we looked at in terms of selection criteria for each of these corridors throughout the city. First of all, looking at type of service, looking at high ridership routes, so making sure that we have high person throughput, safety, so looking at the work that's currently being done with Vision Zero and the identification of those corridors where we have higher collision rates. That was certainly part of our initial thoughts on this. In terms of evaluation metrics, we looked at route on-time performance as well as person throughput, and also looking at improving efficiency and reducing total passenger delay. So there's always expected delay with a bus, but there's the extra delay on top of that, and then you also look at passenger loads. So it got pretty technical. In terms of context, this is really where we pulled in elements from the city. So we looked at equity, we looked at accessibility, we looked at proximity to high frequency transit corridors, we looked at land use, we looked at ACP 50 areas, and we looked at households without vehicles. In addition, we looked at the 2040 land use built form pieces, as well as road authority, city wards, and sectors. So these are the 2019 projects. As you'll see, Hennepin Avenue is on the far left of your screen. That's basically from Franklin to Lake. You have Nicollet from Franklin to Lake as well, and Chicago from 28th to the Chicago Lake Transit Center. What you can see from this map is that, for the most part, each of these corridors currently is located in an area that either abuts or is located within an ACP 50 area, and these areas have higher concentrations of households without vehicles. So each of those met those metrics. In terms of permanent deployments, from Hennepin Avenue, what we'll be looking to do is build off the success of last year's pilot with the adjustments that I mentioned a little earlier in the presentation. And we're looking to deploy a project that basically would have 2 northbound segments, northbound from Lake to the Uptown Transit Center from 7 to 9 a.m. You can see that on the map, on the blue portion. As well as northbound from 25th to Franklin. As I mentioned, not only have the extents changed from 25th to 26th sort of being the breaking point, but also we've reduced the hours in which we would need a bus-only lane to operate. So this would be curbside, 7 to 9 a.m. Southbound from 25th to the Uptown Transit Center, that would be from 4 to 6:30 p.m. Again, that's a much narrower window than what we initially piloted last year. And Chicago Avenue is another permanent deployment that we're looking to do. This is a different one in terms of strategy. This is basically repurposing existing excess right-of-way. It doesn't impact parking. It's not curbside. It's an actual center lane that runs from 28th where we have congestion-related issues and allows those buses to efficiently get into the transit station at Lake in Chicago. That would be an all-day operation. And then we also have one that we're currently in the midst of planning on Nicollet Avenue from Franklin to Lake. This is going to be sort of a tricky and challenging corridor. We're bouncing around different ideas about how we can design this one, but we're also looking to bring in some new techniques and new strategies. This is likely to be a deployment that's somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 weeks. We're still sort of working through that. We anticipate that that will be the last one that happens this year, later this fall. Both Hennepin and Chicago we expect to be deployed in the next 2 months, so sometime around late August, early September. So I just wanted to bring this back, and hopefully this doesn't seem too out of sequence, but I just wanted to provide one of the examples that we picked in 2019 for our corridors and just basically show how that matched up with our evaluation metrics. As I'd mentioned before, we have many evaluation metrics, but what I wanted to do was sort of narrow it down for how we kind of came to conclusions about some of these corridors that were good picks for looking at pilot operations. Hennepin Avenue specifically, I had already talked about just the fact that it had poor on-time performance. There were only 20 to 30% that were on time during AM and PM peak hours. But Hennepin Avenue is a key route with high frequency service, so the Route 6 as well as additional routes. In terms of evaluation metrics, it had high ridership, it had poor on-time performance, it had high total passenger delay, and again, that's considering passenger load as well as anticipated and actual delay, as well as accessibility and equity related concerns. In terms of context considerations, with Minneapolis 2040, this in terms of land use and built form, these are corridor 6 and transit 10, meaning that basically between 6 and 10 stories along this corridor is appropriate. And it's a mixed use, so expecting that there would be ground level related uses that support transit along this corridor. In addition, road authority, this was really important when we did our selections again for 2019. This is a city road authority. We didn't have to try to scramble to work with MnDOT or Hennepin County to deploy this. We were able to work internally and with our partners at Metro Transit to really design and implement this project. In terms of sector award, we're 7 and 10, and in terms of street typologies, there's a couple of different ones depending upon where you're located along the corridor that tie into the land use and built form pieces. So in terms of project distribution, we're aware that the concentration of corridors in 2019 is located in the southern portion of the city. These are, again, all city jurisdiction roadways, and I think that's, again, important to point out. They're also data-driven evaluation metrics. They all meet and score very highly when we look at the evaluation metrics framework that we've put together that includes those context conversations as well. As I mentioned earlier, all of them are either within or abut ACP 50 areas. They all have high percentage of homes or higher percentage of homes without vehicles. And really our goal in terms of future installations for 2020, believe me, we've got a long list of corridors that are geographically distributed throughout the city, and a lot of really exciting projects that we're looking forward to beginning planning late this year, making sure that we bring along our partner agencies on some of these other corridors throughout the city. So it is our intent to have much broader geographic diversity citywide, and again, our advanced coordination and partnerships with both MnDOT, Hennepin County, and of course, Metro Transit. In terms of next steps, we're excited to implement these projects. So by the end of fall of 2019, we will have 2 permanent projects. We will have another one that we're testing, new treatments, different strategies, specifically on Nicollet. we're going to continue to monitor and evaluate, both from a city perspective, but also Metro Transit, and then we'll be reporting back to you to let you know what we find out. So we're really excited. The 2020 corridor selections are also exciting. There are a lot of key corridors throughout the city that could use improvements and enhancements, and we look forward to designing and deploying those in 2020. And so with that, I'll pause and ask if you have any questions. Alan Klugman, again, is also here and available. Thank you.
Any questions for staff for the presentation? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on Hennepin Avenue, I am just looking at traffic volume counts. I'm thinking of Minnehaha Avenue in my ward, which certainly doesn't have as much traffic, but it seems to flow pretty smoothly with a 3-lane configuration. I'm wondering if there's been any thought to a 3-lane configuration that then could open up the whole corridor potentially for dedicated bus lanes.
That's a great question. As you know, the road is planned to be reconstructed in 2023. We were able to basically secure a regional solicitation of federal funding application for this corridor to reconstruct the road. We are in the beginning phases of sort of collecting baseline data, et cetera, moving forward. Despite the fact that we're utilizing parking lanes now with the existing cross-section of the road, we expect the cross-section of the road to look different when we go through this designing and planning effort. So it's going to be different than what it is, and what we're trying to do is work with the condition that we have. In terms of Hennepin, you basically have 30,000 ADT closest to Franklin, and some of that obviously is because of the merging onto the MnDOT ramp, and it drops all the way down to 15,000, down to about 10,000 by the time you get to Lake Street. So, what we're doing through some of this initial work on Hennepin is looking at origin and destination and understanding if people are using this to get to places, if it's just a conduit for people to get through. And so there's a lot of information that we need to know before we start reallocating space within the existing public right-of-way for other vehicles.
That's great to know. I really personally prefer the 3-lane configuration to 4-lane. I think it's so frustrating when you're in that left-hand lane and then somebody wants to turn and you just get stuck there for a good minute and then miss the next light and all that sort of thing. So it just seems to flow so much better, at least from personal observation. So, and I appreciate the information about knowing that that's being looked at and pursued.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher, followed by Bender.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for this. I think it's so important that we prioritize making transit a better option for everybody. We know that there are people who will never use transit, there are people who always use transit, and then there's a group of people in the middle who, if it gets a little bit better, they'll start making that choice more. And that's really, I think, the shift that we're really trying to make. And this is supportive of that, and I'm really happy to see this thinking. One thing I've been getting some questions about lately that this seems like as good a chance to ask as any is this is probably the third or fourth time that we've seen examples from other cities in a slideshow that all have really colorful paint jobs on the street. They have like the whole bus lane painted red or the whole bike lane painted green, I hear a lot of people respond really positively to that when they see those pictures, and we all go, ooh, that seems like really clear about how that street's supposed to be used. And we're like really reluctant to do that in Minneapolis. And I'm curious, are we going to start painting the streets, or why not?
Councilmember Fletcher, Chair Reich. It's a great question. I'm happy that you asked that question. With the permanent implementations of these bus lanes, specifically on Hennepin and specifically on Chicago, we will be painting those. So we will be enhancing them. We think that the paint not only is a strong reinforcement of the fact that the buses belong there and the cars don't, but we'll also be doing additional measures outside of signing. We hope and intend to have variable messaging sign as well to help reinforce. We recognize that bus-only lanes will only operate as efficiently if we allow the buses to move through without vehicles obstructing their way. So there's a lot of different strategies, but paint is certainly one element that will be included.
Thanks. Thank you. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, my constituents are so excited for the return of the Hennepin Avenue bus lanes. So thank you so much for your effort to make this happen this year. That trial only lasted 3 days, and we have gotten persistent questions ever since for the past year about when it's coming back. And I think it really shows the value that we will see from these and how much we will learn from these pilots. I really appreciated Councilmember Johnson's question, and I am a little nervous about, in a location where we have pretty high crash rates now and long crossing distance for pedestrians, the effect of having essentially 6 lanes to cross. And I just wanted to ask, I mean, the current condition is that sometimes there's parking in that parking lane, and often the parking isn't very well utilized. So, you know, in some way this could potentially help the pedestrian safety, but I really wanted to ask how you'll be monitoring that and how that pedestrian element of this roadway will be incorporated into the monitoring.
That's Council President Bender, Chair Reich, it's a great question. You know, I think that was something that gave us pause last year. So that was something certainly that we recognized that if we were going to be operating buses curbside in the PM peak, essentially you have a 6-lane cross section, and that's certainly something that we don't want to have happen in the city. With that said, you know, I've been having discussions with our Vision Zero coordinator, you know, Ethan Foley, just about, you know, are there some things that could potentially complement this effort in the future? And so there's no question that we'll be monitoring those and evaluating those in addition to all of like the technical things that we'll be doing, but there's sort of all those other elements too that come into play. You know, our bicycle is going to be using the bus lane, et cetera. Like there's many different things that we'll be evaluating. I can tell you that though we basically have 3 to 4 years in which we'll be doing monitoring and operations along the corridor for this bus only lane. And there is a lot of opportunity to potentially implement small changes that could positively impact that pedestrian experience, whether it's crossing on Hennepin or crossing some of these side streets through this process, and we're open to it.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. You know, clearly this was a great presentation. You know, oftentimes there's a human element to what our policy purposes, but again, a lot of this boils down to physics. Just how Hennepin Avenue is used and how this transportation mode is the workhorse for this area and probably others as well. To get this attention, to take it to another level, obviously data-driven, field-tested is the right approach. But I think, Council President Bender, there's an eagerness for more. And I think it will have the effects that Councilmember Fletcher alluded to. As to the matter of paint, I think it's been laid out to not be shy about the paint issue. I will note that red is a really cool color. It's an undeniably present color. And for those who are nostalgic or just old like myself, remember the bus system used to be red. So to see MTC red out there is a pretty cool thing. And for those who think that pink and red are confusable, I disagree with that notion. I won't go into our jurisdictional partner who might think otherwise. That might be a later conversation. But nonetheless, I think the gauntlet's been thrown down by Councilmember Fletcher. Be bold with the paint. With that, Director Hutchinson. But
Mr. Chair, sorry, another council member. No, please.
Councilmember Palmisano, and then Hutchinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to express my appreciation to Ms. Hughes and Mr. Klugman for all of the work that you always bring to these projects. This specific effort will have big impacts for everybody who travels through on Hennepin Avenue, and that greatly impacts the 6th bus route that goes past my house and services a lot of the 13th Ward as well as neighboring suburb jurisdictions. And I just want to say, anytime I call or reach out, your responsiveness, your data-drivenness, the specificity in which you've looked at this is really commendable. And I wanted to say thank you for all of your efforts here. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I also would like to say thank you on behalf of Public Works. In 2 ways. One, when we try new things, you are supportive and patient with us. And in particular, last year, when we tried the Hennepin Avenue project, we had support from both Council President Bender as well as Councilmember Goodman, who both said, try it, and we're with you. And similarly, I have to say thank you for the patience shown when, after the pilot was over and there was a good 6 months of public pressure on the council members to do something immediately. And thank you for the patience that you showed to us to allow us to make this a data-driven approach, organize the work so that we could come back in a way that represented the city in the very best light with the very best project. So your support is felt, and we can't do our work without it. And thank you so much.
Thank you. There's no further discussion or questions. I'll move the receiving and filing of the evaluation and selection of potential bus pilot corridors as described in the report. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and we now are adjourned with a concluded agenda. Thank you.